The Seattle rain didn't fall so much as it hung in the air, a damp, suffocating shroud that clung to the black coats and umbrellas of the mourners gathered around the open earth. Clara Vance stood rigid beneath the canvas canopy, her eyes fixed on the polished mahogany casket, though her mind was entirely somewhere else. She was only 32 years old, yet standing there, listening to the monotonous drone of the minister's voice, she felt as though her life had already reached its end. Ethan was gone, 36 years old. A brilliant mind, a loving husband, a man who had built a tech startup from their garage into a multi-million-dollar acquisition, wiped away in an instant by a ruptured brain aneurysm. One moment they were drinking coffee on their porch, arguing playfully about where to spend the holidays, and the next he was on the floor. "You're shivering, my sweet girl," a voice murmured, accompanied by a grip on Clara's arm that was tight enough to bruise. Clara didn't turn her head. She knew the voice, and she knew the grip. It was her mother, Eleanor Sterling. Eleanor's tone was dripping with maternal sorrow, her volume carefully pitched and just loud enough to ensure the surrounding attendees could hear the depth of her devotion to her grieving daughter. But the fingers digging into Clara's bicep were cold and demanding. "I'm fine, Mom," Clara whispered, though she wasn't. She was hollow. On Clara's other side stood her father, Richard. He was a man who wore his authority like a tailored suit, projecting an aura of wealth and competence that his actual bank accounts had rarely supported in recent years. Richard checked his gold Rolex, a gift he had practically demanded from Ethan 3 Christmases ago, and sighed, shifting his weight impatiently. "The ground is practically turning to mud," Victoria, Clara's older sister, complained in a hushed, nasal whisper from behind them. Victoria was 35, impeccably dressed in a designer morning gown that looked more suited for a gala than a graveyard, her perfectly manicured fingers clutching a tissue she hadn't needed to use once. "If he drones on for another 5 minutes, these Louboutins are ruined." "Hush, Victoria," Richard said, though there was no real reprimand in his voice. He leaned closer to Clara. "We'll get you out of here soon, sweetheart. Then we can sit down, have a proper drink, and figure out the financial logistics. You shouldn't have to carry that burden right now. Daddy will handle it." Clara closed her eyes, a sharp ache throbbing behind her temples. Ethan hadn't even been lowered into the ground, and her father was already talking about financial logistics. It was the Sterling family way. Everything was a transaction. Every tragedy was an opportunity to audit the accounts. For the 10 years Clara had been with Ethan, her husband had been a master at holding her family at arm's length. He was unfailingly polite to them, but he had a quiet, unmovable boundaries that Richard's bluster and Eleanor's guilt-tripping could never penetrate. Ethan had always been her shield. Now, standing over his grave, Clara felt entirely exposed to the elements. "Charan." The reception at the Vance residence was a blur of murmured condolences, casseroles Clara would never eat, and the stifling scent of white lilies. Clara sat in the corner of her own living room, holding a cup of tea that had gone cold an hour ago. She watched her family operate. They didn't mourn. They networked. Richard was by the fireplace, speaking in hushed, confident tones with 2 of Ethan's former business partners. Eleanor was holding court in the kitchen, playing the role of the tragically strong mother-in-law, accepting sympathy while subtly establishing herself as the new gatekeeper to Clara. And Victoria was missing. A cold prickle of unease washed over Clara. She set her teacup down and slipped out of the living room, walking quietly down the hardwood hallway toward the back of the house. The door to Ethan's home office was slightly ajar. Clara pushed it open. Victoria was standing behind Ethan's heavy oak desk, her hands sifting quickly through a stack of mail and printed documents. "What are you doing?" Clara asked, her voice flat. Victoria jumped, her hand flying to her chest. "God, Clara, you startled me." She quickly recovered, her face stretching into a mask of deep, sisterly concern. "I was just looking for a pen. I wanted to write down the names of the caterers. They did such a lovely job with the salmon." The pens are in the cup right next to your hand, Victoria. You were looking through Ethan's mail." Victoria sighed, moving around the desk to wrap her arms around Clara in a suffocating hug. "Oh, sweetie, you're exhausted. You're paranoid. I'm just trying to help. Mom and Dad are worried sick about you. Ethan was always so secretive about his business. We just want to make sure you aren't left in a mess. You know how volatile the tech market is. Do you even know where the stock certificates are?" Clara pulled away, her jaw tight. Leave the office, Victoria. Now. Victoria's eyes narrowed for a fraction of a second, a flash of pure, venomous resentment, before the sweet mask slid back into place. Of course. I'll be in the kitchen if you need me. Try to rest, Clara. You look completely drained. When the house finally emptied of guests that evening, only the Sterlings remained. They had packed their suitcases and moved into the guest bedrooms without asking, Eleanor declaring that there was absolutely no way they were leaving Clara alone in her condition. Clara was too exhausted to fight them. She locked herself in the master bedroom, wrapped herself in Ethan's old college sweatshirt, and cried until she couldn't breathe. 2 days later, the rain finally stopped, replaced by a biting gray chill that seeped through the windows of the Harrison & Associates law firm. Clara sat in a heavy leather chair across from Arthur Harrison, a silver-haired attorney who had been Ethan's trusted counsel for the better part of a decade. Flanking Clara, sitting practically on top of her, were her parents. Victoria sat directly behind them, her notebook open, pen poised. "Mr. Harrison," Richard began, adopting his best boardroom voice, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "I want to thank you for fitting us in so quickly. As Clara's father, I'll be taking the lead on her asset management moving forward. We want to get the probate process expedited. I have my own wealth management team ready to transfer Ethan's portfolio so we can secure Clara's future." Mr. Harrison looked over his spectacles at Richard, his expression completely unreadable. Then, deliberately, he shifted his gaze to Clara. "Clara," the lawyer said softly, "my deepest condolences. Ethan was a brilliant man, and he loved you very much." "Thank you, Arthur," Clara whispered. "Now," Richard interrupted, tapping the desk, "let's get down to brass tacks. We know Ethan's company was acquired by Omnicorp last year. We know his equity was valued at roughly $24 million. We need to know where those funds are currently parked, and we need the authorization forms to transfer power of attorney to me." Mr. Harrison picked up a thick manila folder from his desk and opened it slowly. He didn't look at Richard. "Mr. Sterling," Harrison said, his voice crisp and dry, "I am Ethan Vance's attorney and the executor of his estate. I am here to read his last will and testament to his widow. You are here solely because Clara allowed you to be in the room. You have no legal standing, and you will not be managing anything." Eleanor gasped, placing a hand over her heart. "Well, there's no need to be hostile. We are her family. We are just trying to protect her from being overwhelmed." "Let him read the will, Mom," Clara said, her voice finding a small fraction of its usual strength. Harrison adjusted his glasses and began to read. The legal jargon was dense, but Ethan had structured it cleanly. Clara would inherit the primary residence in Seattle, free and clear of any mortgage. She would inherit Ethan's personal vehicles, his personal bank accounts containing roughly $50,000, and all his personal effects. Harrison paused, turning the page. The room was deathly silent. Victoria's pen hovered over her notebook. "Regarding the financial assets stemming from the acquisition of Vanguard Technologies," Harrison read, his voice steady. "The deceased liquidated his entire shareholding position exactly 3 months prior to his passing." Richard sat bolt upright. "Liquidated? He sold the shares for cash? All $24 million? "Yes," Harrison replied. "Where is it?" Victoria blurted out from the back, abandoning all pretense of grief. "According to the testament," Harrison continued, ignoring them, "the entirety of those funds, post-tax, was transferred into an irrevocable blind trust administered by a third-party entity offshore." The silence that followed was absolute. Clara stared at the lawyer, trying to process the words. An irrevocable blind trust? Ethan had never mentioned anything like that. They had talked about buying a vacation home, about starting a charity foundation, maybe even early retirement. He had hidden $20 million? "What do you mean, a blind trust?" Richard's voice was rising, a dangerous red flush creeping up his neck. "Who is the beneficiary? Is it Clara?" "I cannot disclose the beneficiary, as it is a blind trust," Harrison stated calmly. "Furthermore, the trust is structured in a way that neither I, nor Clara, nor anyone in this room has access to it, can draw from it, or can dissolve it. The funds are legally untouchable." "That is absurd!" Eleanor shrieked, dropping her maternal facade completely. She glared at Clara. "What did you do? Did you two have a fight? Were you getting a divorce? Why would he cut you out of the money?" He didn't cut me out, Clara said, though her own heart was pounding with confusion. Ethan wouldn't do that. He just did, Victoria snapped, leaning forward. He left you a house and pocket change, Clara. He took $20 million and threw it into a black hole. He stole from this family. It was his money, Victoria, Clara shot back, turning in her chair. It was marital property, Richard roared, slamming his fist on the armrest. He pointed a trembling finger at the lawyer. I will tie you up in court for the next decade. I will have this will thrown out. I'll prove Ethan was not of sound mind. He was clearly suffering from cognitive decline before the aneurysm. You can't just hide $20 million from a widow. You are welcome to try, Mr. Sterling, Harrison said, utterly unfazed. Though I assure you, Ethan's medical records up until the day of his death confirm he was in perfect psychological health. The trust is ironclad. Now, if you are quite finished shouting in my office, there is one final piece of estate business I must conclude with my client. A loan. We aren't going anywhere, Richard growled. Dad, stop. Clara stood up. Her legs were shaking, but she forced herself to stand tall. She looked at her parents and her sister. In their eyes, she didn't see grief for Ethan or sympathy for her. She saw naked, rabid fury. They looked like wolves who had just watched their meal snatched away. Wait outside. Clara, be reasonable, Eleanor started. Get out, Clara yelled, the sheer volume of her voice shocking even herself. Her family stared at her, stunned into silence. Slowly, Richard stood, his face a mask of furious indignation. He grabbed Eleanor's arm. Fine, we'll be in the lobby. We are far from done with this, Clara. Victoria followed them out, shooting Clara a look of pure disgust before the heavy oak door clicked shut. Clara sank back into her chair, pressing her trembling hands to her face. She felt like she was suffocating. Arthur, I don't understand. Why would he do this? Did he have another life, another family? Why would he hide the money? Mr. Harrison let out a long, heavy breath, the professional stiffness finally dropping from his shoulders. He looked at Clara with deep, paternal sympathy. He opened the center drawer of his desk and pulled out a small, padded manila envelope. Clara, Ethan loved you more than anything in this world, Harrison said softly. He told me once that you were the only real, honest thing in his life. He didn't do this to punish you. He did this to protect you. Protect me from what? Harrison slid the envelope across the polished mahogany desk. He made me swear, on my license and my life, that I would not give this to you until your family was entirely out of the room. Clara stared at the envelope. Her name was written on it in Ethan's familiar, messy scrawl. With shaking fingers, she tore the flap open and tipped the contents onto the desk. 2 things fell out. The first was a heavy, old-fashioned iron key, speckled with rust. The second was a small slip of heavy cardstock. There was no letter, no explanation, just a string of numbers written in black ink. GPS coordinates. Beneath the numbers, in Ethan's handwriting, was a single cryptic sentence. The wolves will come for you when they realize the meat is gone, Clara. Go to the coordinates, lock the door, and trust me one last time. Clara picked up the heavy key. It felt cold against her palm. Arthur, where do these coordinates go? Wyoming, Harrison replied quietly. Somewhere very remote. That is all I know. Ethan purchased the property through 3 different shell companies. It's completely off the grid, and legally, it doesn't even exist in connection to his name. Or yours. But why? Clara pleaded, tears finally spilling over her eyelashes. Why didn't he just tell me? Because if you knew, you would have to lie, Harrison said. And Ethan knew you were a terrible liar, especially to your family. He knew that when he died, they would descend on you. He wanted to make sure that on paper you were essentially bankrupt. He needed them to believe the money was gone. Clara looked at the door. Through the frosted glass, she could see the blurry, pacing silhouettes of her father and sister. Take the key, Clara, Harrison urged gently. Don't tell them about it. Don't tell anyone about it. When you are ready, go find out what your husband left for you. Clara closed her fist around the key. The jagged edges dug into her skin, grounding her. She slipped the key and the coordinates deep into the pocket of her coat. She took a deep breath, wiped her eyes, and stood up. Thank you, Arthur. Clara walked to the office door and pulled it open. Her family was waiting in the lobby like a firing squad. The moment the door shut behind her, Richard stepped forward, blocking her path to the elevator. All right, Richard said, his voice dropping the pretense of the supportive father. It was cold, calculating, and ruthless. Ethan was a fool, and he screwed you over, but we can salvage this. Salvage what, Dad? The money is in an offshore trust. It's gone. The cash is gone, Victoria corrected sharply, stepping up beside their father. But you still have the Seattle house. It's fully paid off. The market value is easily $3 million. Eleanor moved in, reaching out to stroke Clara's hair, though her eyes were hard. Clara, honey, you are in no mental state to live in that big, empty house by yourself. The memories will just eat you alive. You need a fresh start. What are you saying? Clara asked, looking between the three of them. I'm saying you need to sign the deed of the house over to my LLC, Richard stated, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. We will sell it immediately. I'll take the $3 million and invest it properly in my firm's high-yield accounts. We'll generate a monthly stipend for you to live on. You can move back into your old bedroom at our place while you get back on your feet. Clara stared at him. The sheer audacity of it left her breathless. Her husband had been dead for less than a week. They had just discovered Ethan's fortune was out of reach, and within 5 minutes, her father had already pivoted his strategy to cannibalize her last remaining asset. You want me to sell my home? Clara said, her voice trembling, not with sadness this time, but with a sudden searing rage. You want me to give you the money so you can put me on an allowance and move me back into my childhood bedroom. We want to protect you, Eleanor snapped, her patience fraying. Look at yourself. You're a mess. You have no job, you have no husband, and thanks to Ethan, you have no money. Do you know how much property tax is on that house? You'll be bankrupt in a year. We are trying to save you. I'm keeping the house, Clara said firmly. She pushed past her father and hit the elevator button. Richard grabbed her shoulder and spun her around. His fingers dug in painfully. Listen to me, you ungrateful little girl. I paid for your wedding to that arrogant prick. I welcomed him into my family. And he repays us by hiding $20 million of family wealth? You owe us this, Clara. I owe you nothing. Clara ripped her arm out of his grasp. The elevator chimed and the doors slid open. Victoria stepped in front of the doors, blocking them. Her beautiful face was twisted into an ugly, cruel sneer. You think you're so smart, Clara. You think you can just walk away and play the tragic independent widow. But you've always been weak. You've always needed us to clean up your messes. Without Ethan's money, you are nothing. Give Dad the house before you lose it all. Clara looked at her sister. Then she looked at her mother, who stood with her arms crossed, nodding in agreement. Finally, she looked at her father, whose face was purple with rage. Ethan's words echoed in her mind. The wolves will come for you when they realize the meat is gone. He hadn't been paranoid. He had seen them for exactly what they were. For 10 years, Clara had made excuses for them. She had told herself they were just traditional, that they just worried about finances, that they loved her in their own flawed way. But as they stood in the lobby, ready to strip the roof from over her grieving head, the mask finally fell completely. They didn't love her. She was an asset, and she was currently depreciating. Clara pushed Victoria hard in the chest, shoving her out of the elevator doorway. Victoria stumbled back with a gasp. Clara stepped into the elevator and turned to face them as the doors began to close. Don't call me, Clara said, her voice icy and dead. Don't come to the house. If you step foot on my property, I will have you arrested for trespassing. Clara, Eleanor shrieked, you are having a mental breakdown. We'll see you in court, you stupid girl, Richard bellowed as the metal doors slid shut, cutting off his face. The elevator descended. Clara leaned against the back wall, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She thrust her hand deep into her pocket, her fingers closing tightly around the cold, rusty iron of the key. She was completely alone. Her husband was dead, and her family had just declared war on her. But as she gripped the key, a strange, unfamiliar spark ignited in the hollow space Ethan had left behind. It wasn't grief, it was survival. She pulled the slip of paper from her pocket and stared at the GPS coordinates. She didn't know what was waiting for her in the mountains of Wyoming, but whatever it was the only thing she had left. Tomorrow, she would run. The silence of the Seattle house was broken only by the frantic sound of Clara's own breathing and the harsh scrape of zippers. It was 2 a.m. The rain had started again, lashing against the bedroom windows like angry fingertips. Clara was throwing clothes, toiletries, and every piece of important paperwork she could find into a duffel bag. She didn't know how long she would be gone, only that she could not stay. Her phone vibrated on the nightstand, the sudden buzzing making her jump. She stared at the screen. It was Arthur Harrison. Nobody called at 2 a.m. with good news. With a trembling hand, she swiped to answer. "Arthur? Clara, are you at the house?" The attorney's voice was uncharacteristically tight, stripped of its usual measured cadence. "Yes, I'm packing. I'm leaving tonight." "Leave faster," Harrison urged. "I just received an emergency electronic filing notification from the King County Superior Court. Your father has retained a highly aggressive litigation firm. They aren't just suing for the estate, Clara. They have filed an ex parte petition for a temporary conservatorship over you." Clara stopped breathing. The duffel bag slipped from her fingers, hitting the floor with a soft thud. "A conservatorship? Like I'm incapacitated?" "Exactly like that," Harrison said grimly. "They've submitted sworn affidavits from your mother and sister, claiming you have suffered a complete psychological break since Ethan's death. They attached a fabricated psychological evaluation, likely signed off by a doctor on your father's payroll, stating you are a danger to yourself and severely mentally unfit to manage your finances or personal care. They are asking the judge for immediate medical and financial power of attorney." A cold, paralyzing terror washed over her. A conservatorship meant she would lose her basic human rights. Her father could legally lock her in a psychiatric facility. He could seize her bank accounts, sell her house, and dictate every move she made, all under the guise of protecting her. It was the ultimate mechanism of control, weaponized by the people who shared her blood. "If the judge grants the temporary order tomorrow morning," Harrison continued, his tone urgent, "they will send the police and medical transport to your house to collect you. You need to be outside of the state's jurisdiction before the sun comes up. Leave your cell phone behind. They will track its GPS. Take out cash if you can, use a burner phone, and get to the coordinates Ethan left you. I will fight the petition here, but you cannot be in this house when the sun rises." "Okay," Clara whispered, her terror crystallizing into a sharp, diamond-hard resolve. "Thank you, Arthur." She dropped the smartphone on the bed, leaving it there like a discarded skin. She grabbed Ethan's emergency cash stash from the floor safe, slung the duffel bag over her shoulder, and ran down the stairs. 10 minutes later, the taillights of her SUV faded into the torrential Pacific Northwest rain, slipping away into the black of night. The drive was an agonizing marathon of paranoia and exhaustion. Clara drove eastward, crossing the Cascade Mountains as the sun slowly bled into the morning sky. Every time a police cruiser passed her in the opposite lane, her heart hammered against her ribs, terrified that her father had already pulled the strings to have her intercepted. She drank stale gas station coffee, fueled purely by adrenaline and the biting sting of betrayal. Her parents didn't just want Ethan's money. They wanted to erase her autonomy entirely. They wanted to turn her into a puppet, a hollowed-out vessel for their own greed. By the second day, the lush green forests of Washington had given way to the vast, arid expanse of Wyoming. The GPS coordinates led her off the interstate, down a crumbling 2-lane highway, and finally onto a deeply rutted dirt road that seemed to stretch into absolute nowhere. Dust plumed behind her SUV, painting the windows in a fine, gritty film. Finally, the navigation system chimed. "You have reached your destination." Clara put the car in park and stared out the windshield. Her heart sank. Sitting on a flat, sun-baked expanse of scrub brush and cracked earth was a dilapidated, weather-beaten wooden cabin. The roof was sagging, the windows were boarded up with rotting plywood, and a rusted-out tractor sat half-buried in the tall weeds nearby. It looked like an abandoned relic from a century ago, entirely worthless. For a terrifying moment, Clara thought Ethan had made a mistake, or worse, that he had gone crazy before he died. This was the $20 million secret? This pile of rotting wood? She stepped out of the car, the Wyoming wind instantly whipping her hair across her face. She walked up to the sagging front porch, the ancient wood groaning beneath her boots. The front door was heavy oak, scarred and splintered, dominated by a massive rusted iron padlock that looked as old as the cabin itself. Clara reached into her pocket and pulled out the heavy iron key Arthur had given her. It matched the rusted aesthetic of the padlock perfectly, With a trembling hand, she slid the key into the mechanism and turned. It didn't stick or grind. The internal tumblers clicked with the smooth, oiled precision of a bank vault. The heavy padlock snapped open. Clara removed the lock and pushed the wooden door. It didn't budge. She pushed harder, leaning her entire body weight against it. Slowly, silently, the entire door, and the supposedly rotting wooden frame around it, swung inward. She gasped. The wooden exterior was nothing but a hollow shell, a cosmetic facade glued to a foot-thick slab of reinforced military-grade steel. Clara stepped over the threshold, and as she did, automated sensors detected her presence. Deep within the structure, a heavy generator purred to life. Soft recessed LED lighting illuminated the interior, revealing a space that defied everything the exterior promised. It wasn't a cabin, it was a state-of-the-art fortress. The walls were insulated and paneled in sleek, modern wood. A high-end kitchen gleamed in the corner, fully stocked with non-perishables. But the centerpiece of the room was a massive, curved executive desk, surrounded by 4 large computer monitors and a rack of encrypted servers blinking with green lights. A Starlink satellite receiver hummed softly by the window, providing high-speed internet to a place that shouldn't even have running water. Clara walked slowly toward the desk, trailing her fingers over the smooth surface. Ethan's scent, cedarwood and coffee, lingered faintly in the climate-controlled air. She sat in his heavy leather chair and pressed the power button on the main terminal. The screens flared to life, immediately demanding a password. Clara didn't even have to think. She typed in the date of their first anniversary, followed by her maiden name. The system unlocked instantly, bringing up a meticulously organized desktop. There were no emotional video diaries waiting for her, no tearful goodbyes. Ethan was a man of action, a brilliant tactician who believed in giving her the tools to survive, not just the sentiment. On the center screen was a single folder labeled The Oasis Project. Clara opened the folder. It was filled with geological surveys, topographical maps, and heavily redacted corporate communications. She clicked on the primary survey report, her eyes scanning the dense scientific jargon. It took her a few minutes to translate the data into plain English, but when the realization hit her, she literally stopped breathing. Ethan hadn't bought a ranch. He had bought a gold mine. Beneath the desolate, cracked dirt of this specific acreage sat one of the largest, purest, untouched underground aquifers in the American West. Millions of gallons of pristine, icy water trapped in a geological basin directly beneath the cabin. Clara opened the next document, a chain of emails from the acquisitions department of Omnicorp, the same massive tech conglomerate that had bought Ethan's previous startup. The emails were frantic, escalating in tone over the past 2 years. Omnicorp was building a colossal next-generation artificial intelligence data center just 20 miles away. AI servers required astronomical amounts of water for cooling to prevent meltdowns. The local municipal water supply was insufficient. They needed Ethan's aquifer, desperately. The final email in the chain, dated just a week before Ethan died, contained Omnicorp's latest offer for the land and the water rights, $35 million. Ethan had refused. He had locked the land in the blind trust to ensure it could not be sold out from under her, knowing the value would only skyrocket as the AI boom continued. He had hidden it because he knew if her parents smelled $35 million, they wouldn't just try to control her. They would destroy her to get it. The computer chimed, startling Clara out of her shock. An encrypted email application popped up on the screen. It was Arthur Harrison. Clara, I hope you made it. The judge has scheduled an emergency remote evidentiary hearing for the conservatorship petition at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time tomorrow. Because it is an emergency ex parte motion, they are trying to push it through without you present, citing your fragile mental state. I have convinced the judge to allow you to appear via video conference to contest it. You must dial in. If you do not appear and prove your competency, your father will legally own you by noon. Attached was a secure Zoom link. Clara leaned back in Ethan's chair, the soft leather creaking in the silent room. Her parents thought they had her cornered. They thought she was a weeping, broken widow hiding in a motel somewhere, terrified of her own shadow. They thought she was the weak little girl they had always conditioned her to be. Clara looked at the geological surveys, worth tens of millions of dollars, secured in a fortress her husband had built just for her. The fear that had been suffocating her for the past 3 days evaporated, replaced by a cold, searing focus. She wasn't just Ethan Vance's widow anymore. She was the sole guardian of his legacy, and she was going to make her family deeply regret the day they tried to steal her life.
10.
At exactly 9:55 a.m. the next morning, Clara sat at Ethan's desk. She had showered, pulled her hair back into a sleek, professional knot, and put on a crisp white blouse she found in the emergency wardrobe Ethan had packed. She didn't look like a grieving victim. She looked like a CEO about to terminate an underperforming department. She clicked the Zoom link. The screen split into multiple windows. In the top center was Judge Miller, an older, stern-looking woman sitting in her chambers. In the bottom left was Arthur Harrison, looking tense but ready. And in the bottom right window sat the Sterling family. They were crammed together in Richard's plush home office. Eleanor was clutching a tissue, her face perfectly arranged into a mask of maternal agony. Victoria sat beside her, looking suitably grave. Richard sat in the center, flanked by a slick, aggressive-looking lawyer Clara didn't recognize. "All parties are present," Judge Miller stated, her voice crackling slightly over the connection. "We are here for an emergency hearing regarding the petition for involuntary conservatorship over Clara Vance, filed by Richard Sterling. Mr. Sterling, your counsel may proceed." Richard's lawyer leaned into the camera. "Your Honor, this is a tragic case. My client's daughter, Mrs. Vance, tragically lost her husband recently. Since then, she has exhibited severe psychological distress. She has become paranoid, hostile to her own family, and highly erratic. 3 days ago, she fled her home in the middle of the night and disappeared. We have an affidavit from Dr. Eris Thorne, a respected psychiatrist, who reviewed her behavior and concluded she is suffering from acute, complicated grief and potential psychosis. For her own safety, and to protect her remaining assets from being squandered in her current state, her father must be granted immediate conservatorship." Eleanor dabbed her dry eyes with the tissue. "We just want our little girl to be safe, Your Honor. She isn't herself. She's completely broken." Clara watched them perform, feeling absolutely nothing but clinical disgust. "Mrs. Vance," Judge Miller said, turning her attention to Clara's video feed. "These are serious allegations. Your family claims you are a danger to yourself and incapable of managing your affairs. Do you have a response?" Clara leaned forward, the high-definition webcam capturing the absolute clarity and composure in her eyes. "I do, Your Honor. First, I would like to address the fabricated medical evaluation provided by Dr. Thorne. I have never met Dr. Thorne. He has never evaluated me. However, a quick search of his medical license shows he is currently under investigation by the State Medical Board for providing fraudulent prescriptions. Furthermore, he is a golfing partner of my father, Richard Sterling." Richard's face twitched. His lawyer quickly interjected. "Objection, Your Honor. Relevance overruled," Judge Miller said sharply, her eyes narrowing at Richard. "Continue, Mrs. Vance." "My family claims I am incapable of managing my finances, Your Honor," Clara said, her voice steady and echoing with authority in the acoustic-paneled bunker. "Yet as we speak, I am sitting in the central operations office of a commercial real estate property located out of state, managing a multi-million-dollar corporate negotiation. I did not flee in a psychotic break. I relocated to my secondary property to conduct business, deliberately leaving my phone behind to avoid the relentless harassment from my family, who have been trying to extort me from my Seattle home since the day of my husband's funeral." Victoria scoffed loudly on the video feed. "She's lying. She doesn't own any commercial property. Ethan's money is gone. He put it in a blind trust." Clara smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile that Ethan used to wear when he was about to destroy a competitor in a boardroom. "Mr. Harrison," Clara said smoothly, "if you would please screen share Exhibit A and B with the court." Arthur Harrison smirked, clicking his mouse. The Zoom screen shifted, displaying a legally binding document. "Your Honor," Harrison said, "this is the deed to a 300-acre property in Wyoming, fully owned by an LLC of which Clara Vance is the sole managing director. And Exhibit B is a pending letter of intent from Omnicorp, offering $35 million for the acquisition of the water rights on said property. Mrs. Vance is currently evaluating this offer, along with 2 other competing bids from rival tech firms." The color rapidly drained from Richard Sterling's face. He stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. Eleanor's fake tears vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated shock. Victoria looked like she had just been slapped across the face. $35 million, and Clara was in total control of it. As you can see, Your Honor, Clara continued, her voice ringing like a bell, I am perfectly sane, perfectly competent, and currently managing an asset portfolio significantly larger than my father's entire firm. My family filed this petition because they realized they were cut out of my husband's will, and they sought to use the legal system to kidnap me and steal my remaining assets. It is not an act of love. It is attempted financial exploitation. Judge Miller stared at the Omnicorp document, then looked back at the Sterling family's feed. The silence stretched, heavy and lethal. Mr. Sterling, Judge Miller finally said, her voice dripping with absolute contempt, I have rarely seen such a blatant, offensive abuse of the conservatorship process. Your petition is not only denied, but I am referring your psychiatrist to the state board with my personal recommendation for immediate suspension. Furthermore, I am granting a permanent restraining order against you, your wife, and your daughter. If you come within 500 feet of Mrs. Vance, or attempt to contact her in any capacity, I will see to it that you are jailed for contempt of court. Your Honor, please, Richard stammered, panic finally setting in. This hearing is adjourned, Judge Miller snapped, and her video feed went black. Clara looked at the remaining window. Her parents and sister were staring at her, their expressions a mix of horror, rage, and a brand new emotion they had never directed at her before. Fear. You heard the judge, Clara said softly, leaning into the camera. If you ever come near me again, I will bury you. She clicked end meeting. The bunker fell silent again. Clara sat in the quiet hum of the servers, her hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline crash. She had won the battle. She had defended her freedom and secured the fortress. But as she looked at the folder on the desktop, she knew the war was far from over. Her family was greedy, but they were also vindictive. They knew about the Wyoming property now. They knew there was $35 million on the table. They wouldn't stop. They would dig, they would lie, and they would try to find a loophole to take it all. Clara opened a new terminal window on Ethan's computer. She remembered what Ethan had told her once, late at night, about dealing with toxic people. You don't just build walls, Clara. You dig a moat, and you fill it with something that will bite them if they try to cross. It was time to see what else her brilliant, secretive husband had left hidden in the servers. It was time to find the teeth. The digital clock on Ethan's multi-monitor display flipped to 3 a.m. Clara sat bathed in the cool blue light of the screens, a half-empty mug of black coffee cooling beside her keyboard. She had spent the last 48 hours doing something she had never done before, dissecting her own family. After Judge Miller had thrown out the conservatorship petition, Clara knew the silence from Seattle wouldn't last. Her father's pride was wounded, but his greed was starving. He would find another angle. So Clara had dug into the encrypted servers, searching for the teeth Ethan had promised. She found a locked partition on the hard drive labeled simply, the contingency. It was password protected, but this time, Clara's birthday didn't work. Neither did their anniversary, or Ethan's favorite quotes. The partition sat there, an impenetrable black box, mocking her exhaustion. The breakthrough came the next morning, heralded by the shrill ring of her encrypted satellite phone. Clara? Arthur Harrison's voice was crisp, though edged with a deep, rumbling anger. They've made their next move, and it is incredibly dirty. Clara stared out the window at the rugged Wyoming landscape. Tell me, your father's lawyers just filed a massive civil suit against the estate and the Wyoming LLC, Arthur explained. They are claiming that 2 years ago, Ethan signed a marital asset guarantee, a legally binding promise that in the event of his death, a portion of his liquid assets would be used to cover a $3 million deficit in your father's investment firm. They've produced a physical contract, allegedly bearing Ethan's signature and yours. Clara frowned, her brow furrowing. Arthur, Ethan never signed anything like that. He despised my father's business practices, and I certainly never signed it. I know, Arthur said, but the signature looks remarkably authentic. They are using it to place a legal lien on the Wyoming property, effectively freezing your ability to sell the water rights to Omnicorp until the debt is settled. It's extortion, Clara. They know we can fight it, but they are betting you won't want to hold up a $35 million deal over a $3 million dispute. They want a settlement payout. A cold, bitter laugh escaped Clara's lips. It was so perfectly Victoria. When Clara had caught her sister snooping through Ethan's home office on the day of the funeral, Victoria hadn't just been looking for bank statements. She had been looking for a signature to forge. "Arthur?" Clara asked, her eyes darting to the locked partition on the screen. "What is the exact court filing number for this lawsuit?" Arthur rattled off a string of alphanumeric digits. Clara typed them into the password prompt of the contingency folder and hit enter. The screen flashed green. Authorization accepted. Ethan hadn't just built a fortress, he had built a mousetrap, and her family had just eagerly stepped on the cheese. "Arthur," Clara said, her voice dropping to a deadly calm as the files began to populate on her screen. "Don't fight the lien. Call their lawyers. Tell them I want to negotiate a settlement face-to-face. Have them fly out to Wyoming. Tell them Omnicorp will be at the table." "Clara, are you sure? Bringing them to the negotiation table gives them legitimacy." "I don't want to give them legitimacy, Arthur," Clara said, her eyes scanning the explosive documents unspooling before her. "I want to give them enough rope to hang themselves." 3 days later, the air in the executive conference room of the Four Seasons Resort in Jackson Hole was thick enough to cut with a knife. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, the jagged snow-capped peaks of the Grand Tetons loomed, beautiful and unforgiving. Clara sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, wearing a tailored navy suit that felt like armor. To her right sat Arthur Harrison, looking perfectly relaxed. To her left was David Trent, the vice president of acquisitions for Omnicorp, a sharp-eyed corporate shark who was entirely aware that he was sitting in the middle of a vicious family war. The heavy oak doors opened, and the Sterling family walked in. Richard led the pack, his chest puffed out, radiating an arrogant confidence that made Clara's stomach turn. Eleanor trailed behind him, wearing designer sunglasses indoors to hide the lack of tears. Victoria walked beside their new attorney, a slick, overpriced litigator from Seattle named Marcus Vance. They took their seats opposite Clara. Richard smiled, a predatory paternal grin. "Clara, sweetheart," Richard began, his tone dripping with fake warmth. "It didn't have to come to this. We are family. We just want what is fair, and we want to see you protected." Clara didn't blink. "Let's skip the theater, Richard. You're here because you want a piece of the Omnicorp deal. State your terms." The use of his first name made Richard's smile falter, but Marcus, the lawyer, smoothly took over. He opened his leather briefcase and slid a manila folder across the table. "Mrs. Vance, we are prepared to lift the lien on your property today," Marcus said. "In exchange, my client requires the fulfillment of the promissory note your late husband executed. Given the current valuation of the Wyoming asset, we feel a 10% equity share, $3.5 million, is a generous compromise to settle the debt and keep this matter out of protracted litigation." Bye. David Trent, the Omnicorp VP, leaned forward. "Omnicorp will not proceed with the land acquisition while there is an active lien on the title. We need clean ownership, Mrs. Vance." "See?" Victoria chimed in, leaning over the table, unable to hide her smugness. "You need us to sign off, Clara. Just pay Dad what Ethan owed him, and you can go back to hiding in your little cabin." Clara slowly reached out and opened the folder Marcus had provided. Inside was a photocopy of the contract. At the bottom, in blue ink, were 2 signatures, Ethan's and hers. They were incredibly good forgeries. Victoria had always been the artistic one. "Victoria," Clara said, her voice echoing in the quiet room. "This contract is dated October 14th of last year. Did you personally witness Ethan sign this document?" Victoria exchanged a quick glance with her father, then lifted her chin defiantly. "Yes, I did. He signed it in Dad's office. I was standing right there." "And you witnessed me sign it as well?" "You signed it later that evening," Victoria lied effortlessly. "You knew Dad's firm needed capital. You agreed to help." Clara nodded slowly. She closed the folder. "Mr. Trent," she said, turning to the Omnicorp executive, "my husband was a brilliant software engineer, but he was also deeply paranoid about corporate espionage. Do you know what a bait file is?" David Trent smiled faintly. "A fake document or file deliberately left in an accessible location, usually implanted with a tracking pixel or metadata to identify whoever steals it." "Exactly," Clara said. She reached into her own leather portfolio and pulled out a thick stack of glossy, high-definition photographs, sliding them across the table toward her family. When Ethan realized his health was failing, He knew you would scavenge his home office the moment he died, Clara said, her eyes locking onto Victoria's. So he drafted a fake promissory note. He printed it out, left the signature lines blank, and hid it at the bottom of his filing cabinet. But he didn't just print it. He used a proprietary microscopic watermark matrix developed by his own company. It's invisible to the naked eye. Victoria's face went chalk white. She stared down at the photographs. They were macro lens images of the very contract she had submitted to the court, illuminated under a blacklight. Beneath the forged signatures, glowing in bright neon green, was a timestamp and a microscopic serial number. Ethan also set up a hidden security camera in his office, Clara continued, her voice rising, filling the room with an undeniable, crushing authority. I have crystal clear 4K video footage of you, Victoria, stealing that blank document from his desk while the rest of the guests were eating funeral sandwiches in my kitchen. Richard shot up from his chair. This is a setup. You can't prove— Sit down, Richard, Arthur Harrison snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. Or we will have security remove you. Richard slowly sank back into his chair, the bluster draining from him. As for October 14th, Clara said, pulling a verified passport ledger from her file. On the day Ethan supposedly signed this document in your office, he was in Tokyo, Japan, consulting for a robotics firm. His passport was stamped, his hotel receipts are documented, and he gave a keynote address to 500 people. I have the YouTube link if you'd like to watch it. The silence in the room was absolute. The slick lawyer, Marcus, stared at the documents, realizing his clients had just dragged him into a massive career-ending felony. He slowly closed his briefcase. Victoria, Clara said, leaning forward, you just admitted on the record, in front of a corporate executive and 2 attorneys, that you witnessed the signing of a document that was forged. Submitting this to a federal court to extort money is wire fraud, perjury, and attempted grand larceny. Eleanor began to cry, but this time the tears were real. Clara, please. She's your sister. She made a mistake. We were just desperate. Desperate? Clara echoed, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. She didn't feel triumphant. She just felt an overwhelming, profound disgust. She reached into her portfolio one last time and pulled out the contents of the Dark Secrets folder. 3 heavy, red-tabbed binders. She dropped them onto the table with a heavy thud. Ethan's contingency plan didn't just contain proof of your forgery, Clara said softly. Once you triggered his system by filing that lawsuit, it decrypted a 10-year financial audit he had secretly conducted on your family. Richard stared at the red binders, his hands beginning to shake uncontrollably. I always wondered why you controlled my childhood trust fund so tightly, Dad, Clara said, her voice trembling slightly with the weight of a lifetime of betrayal. You always told me it was tied up in long-term bonds, but Ethan tracked the routing numbers. You drained my college fund 20 years ago to cover your own bad margin calls. You've been funneling money out of my name to avoid IRS audits for a decade. You didn't file for a conservatorship to protect me. You filed it because you knew if I ever gained control of my own finances, I would see the massive gaping holes where you had robbed me blind. Richard looked away, unable to meet his daughter's eyes. The invincible patriarch was gone, replaced by a pathetic, terrified old man facing the consequences of his own greed. Mrs. Vance, David Trent from Omnicorp interrupted gently, looking at the Sterling family with open disgust. Does Omnicorp need to be concerned about legal entanglement with these individuals regarding the property? No, Mr. Trent, Clara said, her gaze fixed on her father, because they are going to sign a document for me right now. Arthur Harrison slid a single stapled document across the table to Richard. This is an irrevocable waiver and non-disclosure agreement, Clara explained. It states that you relinquish any and all claims to Ethan's estate, my personal assets, the Wyoming LLC, and any future earnings. It also includes a permanent, legally binding no-contact order. If you call me, email me, or come within 1,000 feet of me, I will hand these 3 red binders to the Internal Revenue Service and the FBI. Victoria was sobbing now, her face buried in her hands. Eleanor was shaking her head, whispering Clara's name as if it were a prayer. Sign it, Clara commanded. Richard picked up the pen. His hand shook so violently he could barely hold it. He looked at Clara one last time, perhaps searching for the compliant, desperate-to-please little girl he had raised. But Clara Vance was gone. In her place sat a woman forged in the fires of grief and betrayal, wearing armor built by a man who had loved her enough to set her free. Richard signed the paper. Victoria and Eleanor followed suit, their signatures jagged and tear-stained. "Get out," Clara said. They didn't say a word. They gathered their coats and practically fled the room, leaving their highly paid lawyer to scurry awkwardly behind them. When the heavy oak doors finally clicked shut, the silence in the room felt different. It wasn't tense anymore. It felt clean. David Trent let out a long breath and smiled. "Well, Mrs. Vance, I've been in hundreds of acquisitions meetings in my career, but I have never seen a hostile takeover handled quite so efficiently. Shall we discuss the $35 million transfer of the water rights?" Clara looked at the forged document, the fake signatures, and the red binders containing the ugly truth of her past. She swept them all back into her portfolio, closing the clasp with a satisfying click. "Yes, Mr. Trent," Clara said, a genuine, unburdened smile finally breaking across her face. "Let's talk about the future." Weeks later, the Wyoming winter began to thaw, surrendering to the vibrant, startling green of early spring. Clara stood on the newly reinforced porch of the cabin. The heavy steel door was open behind her, letting the fresh mountain air sweep through the bunker. In the distance, a team of Omnicorp surveyors was setting up equipment near the ridge, operating under the strict environmental guidelines Clara had insisted upon in the final contract. The water would be shared, the land protected, and her bank accounts were now secured with wealth she could scarcely comprehend. But as she looked out over the vast, rolling expanse of the property, she didn't think about the money. She felt the heavy iron key sitting in her coat pocket. Ethan's final gift hadn't just been a fortress, or a gold mine, or a weapon to destroy her abusers. His greatest gift had been the truth. He had forced her to see her family for what they were, and in doing so, he had forced her to see herself. She wasn't weak. She wasn't dependent. Clara took a deep breath of the crisp Wyoming air. She was entirely alone in the wild, rugged heart of the American West, and for the first time in her life, she felt completely, beautifully safe. 6 months had passed since the heavy oak doors of the Jackson Hole conference room had closed on the Sterling family. In Wyoming, the seasons had shifted from the vibrant green of spring to the golden, sun-drenched warmth of late summer. Clara Vance stood on the wraparound mahogany deck of what used to be a dilapidated fake cabin. It was unrecognizable now. Using a fraction of the initial $10 million upfront payment from Omnicorp, Clara had hired a top-tier architectural firm to transform Ethan's bunker into a stunning, eco-modern glass and timber estate that blended seamlessly into the rugged landscape. The reinforced steel doors remained, but they were now hidden behind beautiful hand-carved cedar. She took a sip of her morning coffee, watching a small herd of wild mustangs graze near the ridge. Miles away, out of sight and completely silent, Omnicorp had begun their water extraction process. True to their contract, they had built a state-of-the-art closed-loop cooling facility that preserved the local ecosystem. Clara's daily oversight had earned her the deep, grudging respect of David Trent and the Omnicorp board. She wasn't just a widow who got lucky. She was a fierce, uncompromising business partner. Her encrypted satellite phone buzzed on the patio table. It was Arthur Harrison. "Good morning, Clara," Arthur said, his voice carrying a distinct note of satisfaction. "I hope the Wyoming air is treating you well." "It's perfect, Arthur. What's the news from Seattle?" "The dominoes have finally fallen," Arthur replied. "It's on the front page of the Seattle Times financial section this morning. I thought you'd want to hear it from me first." Clara leaned against the wooden railing, her gaze fixed on the mountains. "Tell me, without the $3 million from Ethan's estate to cover his margin calls, your father's investment firm couldn't hide the deficit anymore," Arthur explained. "Last week, a major client demanded a routine audit. When your father couldn't produce the liquid assets, the client went to the SEC. The federal authorities raided Richard Sterling's offices at 6 o'clock yesterday morning. They seized his servers, his ledgers, and froze all of his personal and corporate accounts." Clara felt a strange stillness wash over her. For 32 years, Richard Sterling had seemed like an invincible giant, a man who controlled everything and everyone around him through intimidation and wealth. Now, he was just a desperate man caught in a trap of his own making. "What about the rest of them?" Clara asked, her voice even, devoid of pity. "It gets worse for them," Arthur continued. "Because his accounts are frozen, the mortgage on their Mercer Island estate has defaulted. The bank has already initiated foreclosure proceedings. I also have it on good authority that Victoria's fiancé, the plastic surgeon she was parading around last Christmas, broke off the engagement the moment the SEC raid hit the news. He didn't want the scandal attaching to his clinic. I hear Victoria is currently trying to sell her designer bags and jewelry on consignment just to pay a retainer for a criminal defense attorney. And the red binders? Clara asked, referring to the 10-year audit Ethan had compiled, exposing her parents for draining her childhood trust fund. Still locked in my secure vault, per your instructions, Arthur said. They haven't broken the non-disclosure agreement. They haven't tried to contact you. Frankly, Clara, they don't need you to destroy them. They've done a magnificent job of destroying themselves. Thank you, Arthur, Clara said softly. Keep the binders locked away. Let the SEC handle my father. I'm done carrying their weight. She hung up the phone and looked out at the vast, open sky. For years, she had believed her family's narrative, that she was the weak sister, the fragile daughter who needed to be guided, managed, and controlled. But Ethan had known the truth. He had known that her family wasn't holding her up. They were an anchor, dragging her into their toxic depths. Ethan had cut the rope. Clara walked back inside the cool, sunlit living room of her new estate. She walked past the sleek modern kitchen and down the hallway to the only room in the house that had remained exactly as it was when she first arrived, Ethan's office. The heavy executive desk sat in the center, a silent monument to the man who had loved her enough to fight a war for her from beyond the grave. Clara sat in his leather chair and opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a single, sealed envelope she had found hidden beneath the false bottom of the drawer during the renovations. On the front, in Ethan's handwriting, it read, "To Clara, open when the wolves are gone and the house is quiet." She had waited months to open it, wanting to be sure the war was truly over. Today, with her father facing federal indictment and her sister stripped of her hollow socialite status, Clara knew the wolves were finally, permanently gone. With a steady hand, she broke the seal and unfolded the heavy paper. My beautiful Clara, if you are reading this, it means you won. It means you stood your ground. You looked the people who tried to break you in the eye, and you realized how small they truly are. I am so sorry I couldn't be there to stand beside you. I am sorry for the secrecy, and the shock, and the pain I know my silence caused you in those first few days. But I knew your heart, Clara. Your heart is too kind, too forgiving. If I had told you my plan, you would have tried to warn them. You would have tried to save them from themselves. Some people cannot be saved. They can only be survived. This ranch, the money, the fortress, they were never meant to be a hiding place for you. They were meant to be a foundation. A place where you could finally discover who Clara Vance is when no one is telling her what to do, what to think, or how to grieve. Do not mourn me forever, my love. Use the wealth. Build something magnificent. Travel the world, start a business, or just sit on the porch and watch the wild horses run. The world is entirely yours now, and nobody can ever take it away from you again. You were the best part of my life. Forever yours, Ethan. A single tear slipped down Clara's cheek, landing softly on the ink. It wasn't a tear of sorrow, but of profound, overwhelming gratitude. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in her pocket, keeping it close to her heart. Later that afternoon, Clara sat down at Ethan's computer, now her computer. She opened a new document and began drafting the mission statement for a new nonprofit organization. She was going to take $5 million of the Omnicorp money and launch the Vance Foundation. Its sole purpose would be to provide elite, ruthless legal representation and emergency financial support for women trapped in financially abusive relationships, women whose families or spouses were using money and legal threats to control them. She was going to build an army of Arthur Harrisons. She was going to give other women the same armor Ethan had given her. Clara typed the final sentence of the Foundation's charter, the clicking of the keyboard echoing with a sharp, decisive rhythm in the quiet room. She looked at her reflection in the dark monitor screen. The terrified, grieving girl from the Seattle graveyard was completely gone. Staring back at her was a woman who owned her land, owned her wealth, and finally, unequivocally, owned herself. The sun began to set over the Wyoming mountains, painting the sky in brilliant strokes of gold and violet. Clara Vance turned off the computer, walked out onto the deck, and smiled as she watched the night roll in, completely unafraid of the dark.